Amber Bay, and our communications folks. And so again, thanks for coming out, and I'm really happy to be able to give you an update here. I'll give you a little bit of background as to why I joined and what my role is. I was working for a member of Congress over the border for the last 20 some odd years, and also for a state senator. So I've been around the Irongate area, and was around in 2001 when the water was turned off, and that was horrific, and saw what happened in the community. And the following year, we got the water turned on, then we had a big fish kill. So there was just horrible things trading back and forth. So I lived through that. I witnessed that. And there's a different way to do business than to lurch from crisis to crisis. And I learned that in my first dam removal, which is in my hometown in Red Bluff. It ended up being a big win-win for the fishery and also for farmers. Situation was, we had a Bureau of Reclamation project blocking a river. The salmon couldn't get through. It's not the identical situation, but there's some similarities here. And a judge said, that can't continue. You can't be harming fish, Bureau of Reclamation. So the compromise was to put a fish passage, or basically raise the gates up the fish pass, put in a pumping facility and a fish screen. And in the end, even though it was controversial, and even though a popular impoundment of the lake went away, the end result was that ag prospered and fish were able to pass. And that was a harrowing experience, because had we not met the deadline, and had we not met the judge's requirement, the water would have been turned off to about $1 billion worth of ag down in the Central Valley in my hometown area. Up in this neck of the woods, I know it's controversial, I know it's been complex. I've seen peace break out, I've seen people argue, I've seen it all. I've been around for a long time. And I see the potential for a huge win-win here, and that's why I wanted to be part of it. Right now, when you look at what's going on with ag, one of the issues is that water is being held back to deal with a sick Klamath River. We have a disease process in the river. We have sea shafts disease. We have parasites. We have poor water quality. What if we fix that? And what would be the implications for ag? What would be the implications for flushing flows? Would you still be having to hold back 50,000 acre feet to meet a court-ordered flushing flow to take care of a disease process if we can make the disease process go away? The lawyers make me say, we don't control flow decisions. We don't control the decision about the block of water that's remaining. That's up to a judge. But our job is to improve conditions in the river, restore the fishery, and that has a direct benefit for ag. So I see this as a very ag-friendly project, and I see it as a big win-win for the community. I'd like to clarify one thing. It'll come up, I'm going to do a slideshow here and kind of walk you through the project, but I don't know if it's as prevalent up here, but in Northern California and in my neck of the woods, there's been a big misperception for a long time that dam removal means I'm going to have to pay more for electricity. And the inverse is true. With dam removal, that surcharge is known and it's capped. The customer surcharge, which will go away on a date certain. They've got about 150 million of it collected. They're going to collect a max of 200 million. That's a capped cost for ratepayers, so it's known and it ends. In a relicensing mode, one of the reasons PacificCorp decided to not go into relicensing is just looking at the numbers. The cost of fish passage and the other environmental mitigation they would have to do starts you at about 400 million and goes up from there, and the costs are in fact uncapped according to information filed with the PUC, because a new issue can come up, and so for the term of license for 50 years, costs can escalate, And under the rules that the PUC operates under, those costs get passed on to customers. So I've had businesses approach me and say, hey, just from a power cost issue, I don't know if that thing's gonna work or not, but I don't wanna pay a lot more than I have to for electricity. It's hard enough to stay in business. So this is one of the many things I want to clarify, that we will have definitely time for a Q&A afterward. I'm gonna go through a fairly quick PowerPoint. And when we do have the Q&A, if we could hold it to 3 minutes until we can get around everybody. We don't have a huge crowd, so we can double back if that's not sufficient time. But with that, this is our project. So we've got 4 dams in question. JC Boyle up in Oregon. The other 3, Irongate, Copco 1, Copco 2, are in Northern California. The KRRC, who are we? We came into existence fairly recently in 2016. The KRRC is a creation of PacificCorp, California, Oregon, and other signatories to the amended Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement. We are the dam removal entity. PacificCorp signed on to this. They didn't want to be the dam removal entity. They wanted another party to do that. So we're it, and we're a very small nonprofit with a very, very big budget. And that's why we can hire really good people like Seth and others to do the technical work and pass muster with FERC. So the board has been appointed by the various signatories. We have a governance and protocols, board policies, a really good board full of heavy hitters, including a former governor here, and some significant names in the water world in the West. Hired staff and contractors, established initial risk management program, and our role, and this is key, our role is to decommission the dams, and we're not authorized to evaluate dam removal alternatives. And over the years, I've heard a lot of alternatives. Folks have floated, why don't you try this, why don't you try capturing fish and trucking them and hauling them around, or why don't you leave one of the dams, or a host of options. But that policy decision has already been made. I mean, PacificCorp made this decision along with Oregon, California, and other signatories. We carry out that decision, so we don't revisit it. You can definitely weigh into the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission on your views about whether our plan is adequate, and they'll be holding us accountable for a really good plan. But our job is to move forward with the decision that's been made. We are funded. As I mentioned, we've got funding that's collected from customer surcharges. Your customer base is larger in Oregon, so 184 million from Oregon, 16 million from the state of California, and then the California legislature has authorized from a water bond up to an additional 250 million. So a grand total of $450 million is available for this project. We anticipate not having to use all that, and California would like that, as much of that as they can get. Those are the 4 projects. Some regulatory issues and approvals. We filed our application to FERC and the states in 2016. Just last Thursday, we had an order come down from FERC touching on one of our applications, which is the transfer application. That question before FERC is, will you transfer the license that PacificCorp has to operate those dams, transfer that license to the KRRC? Do you find us qualified to accept the license? And knowing full well that our intent is not to continue operating, but to remove. So will you transfer? And then the other application, which is pending, is the surrender order. That question is, will you accept our plan to decommission the dams? The action that FERC took was not a complete decision on the transfer. They did order and authorize that the license basically be subdivided so that those 4 dams in question become a separate license and a smaller license, and that would be the one that we contemplate taking from PacificCorp. We have a draft environmental impact report required under California law, draft expected late spring 2018. Water quality certifications, drafts expected late 2018. Something called the definite plan will be sent to FERC no later than July 1st this year, and that will answer a lot of questions that we still have not been able to quite answer, either for FERC or for the public. There are some outstanding questions like how exactly are you going to handle liability, because KRRC intends to do the project and go away and leave behind a substantial levels of liability protection, a fund so that we can handle any issue that may arise after we're gone. FERC will want to see the specifics. We'll be getting that to them, and then they'll pass muster on that, or they'll make a decision on that. FERC will perform NEPA, comply with the National Environmental Policy Act. They've not started that yet, but they're very familiar with this project. They've been looking at it for a long time. They've got a boatload of information. This is not going to be new to them, but they'll probably refresh some of the information. And then we've been doing formal and informal tribal consultations that continues on. Okay, so technical studies again, definite plan 2018, field studies, technical assessments, risk management. Current thinking on the timeline, and this is new information, is it's changed a bit. We had been aiming for January, February of 2020 to be in the water and to start removing the facilities. That was pretty ambitious and was really predicated on just absolutely everything going great, which when you're working on a really big project and you've got regulatory issues and you're dealing with state and federal agencies, not a surprise that sometimes things slip. So the big takeaway here is that the dam removal is now slated more for, we're looking at 2021 instead of 2020. It's a situation where kind of if you miss a day, you miss a year, because we can't just miss a few weeks and then push it down. We have to be in the river, in the water, draining the reservoirs in January and February to minimize impacts as much as possible to fish. So that's why and the goal is to take the reservoirs down simultaneously about 5 feet per day for a 2-month period, get the sediment moved through the system, and try to minimize the impact as much as possible. Yes, there's going to be an impact, and yes, moving a big bunch of sediment through the system is going to affect aquatic species. That's an unavoidable impact. But the fisheries biologists say that the short-term hit for the long-term gain is absolutely worth it, because right now we've got crashing fish numbers. The trajectory we are on is not a pretty picture. It's not going where we need to go. Opening up the tributaries, opening up cold water again, opening up habitat 400 plus miles that fish have not had for a century, because there is no fish passage at Irongate, is seen as a huge priority and seen as something that's going to be extremely beneficial to the fishery. So that's the big one. But again, we've got the FERC process for license transfer and surrender. The hash marks means, hey, we're kind of fudging because this thing is a moving target. But again, you're looking at 2019, California and Oregon water quality certifications, looking into 2019, other permits, 2019. Final design will be in the next couple of years of 2019, 2020. There will be some site prep and some construction activities in 2020, so we'll still be busy. And then again, we expect dam removal to begin January, February, and then we'll do some monitoring, adaptive management, and we're not just going to leave behind a big, mud field. We've got some brochures out front that show what has happened with other dam removals, and Seth, my colleague, has worked on multiple dam removals. You can revegetate it, you hydroseed it, you can sculpt it, you can get into the river and mechanically move things around. and make it look like a free-flowing river again. It's really remarkable, and the response from fish in other dam removals has been pretty remarkable. Nature is pretty resilient, and fish can come back, and they do come back. So we're evaluating work packaging and construction delivery methods. We'll be talking to contractors. There's probably a few of them here tonight, and we're moving forward with the how are we going to do this. And we will be initiating a procurement process spring 2018, collecting seeds and plant propagation, and then doing pre-construction activity. We'll be asking folks, hey, can we come onto your land and buy seeds and native plants and that type of thing? So we're going to be trying to restore a natural system. Some of the benefits, again, I've touched on: lower costs for customers than for upgrading dams due to the agreement that PacificCorp negotiated. It's a much safer place for ratepayers to be to know what your costs are than to be on the hook for heaven only knows what, and the species du jour that might come up, and any environmental issue that might come up if PacificCorp was going to continue with relicensing. That's why they made that decision. It was a really rational business decision to limit costs for the ratepayers, and they can get electricity elsewhere. These 4 dams are supplied maybe 1 to 1.5% of their generation capacity. They can easily replace it and already have plans to do so. For water quality, we're going to improve temperature, oxygen, acidity, deal with those algae blooms that come up seasonally behind the reservoirs. It's bad stuff, and no one can look at that and say, this is great water quality. Those blooms will not be forming in a free-flowing river. It's just a different system. They heat up. Right now, the reservoirs heat up. The algae blooms. It's not only bad for water quality, it's bad for the fish, and when it dies, it becomes a food source for a parasite that lives downstream, or a worm that lives downstream that's an intermediary host. It's like perfect conditions for very bad things to happen to fish. So we're going to improve that. We'll really be dealing with fish health, improving their habitat, decreasing disease. Recreation. Imagine what could happen if steelhead come roaring back and salmon and other fish species. When I saw the plans that we had for new operations of a fish hatchery, and I didn't see steelhead on the list, I got a little alarmed, like, hey, are we giving up on steelhead? And the answer is no. We don't feel we're going to have to propagate steelhead, that they're going to come back in a very robust way. And that's a popular thing to fish for. That could be a really cool tourism thing, and fishermen, I'm imagining them coming in from all over to fish again on the Klamath, and restoring tribal fisheries, and undoing some of the bad stuff that's happened in the last several decades. So new opportunities for recreation and for fishing. Agriculture, again, we don't impact ag, and please note that Link and Keno dams stay in place, so we don't touch those. In fact, Keno is going to need some improvement, and Reclamation is well aware of that. We've got to do a better job on fish passage, so we are not remotely considering touching those dams, and those serve agriculture. On the jobs front, we're going to create a few hundred direct jobs and over 1,000 indirect jobs in the short term, and then longer-term jobs for the recreation and commercial fishing industries. Some questions we often receive, again, are there alternatives to dam removal? There are, theoretically, and people have tried other things, but again, in this particular case, the decision was made, the policy decision was made. We're going to do removal. We're going to store the fishery. We're going to store the river back to its natural function. So we cannot entertain alternatives to dam removal. I've heard a lot of questions about the sediments behind the dam. over the years. Hey, 15 million plus cubic yards of what? And so we didn't want there to be what. So the federal government and we've been looking at the sediments, and mostly the feds looked at it and have extensively reviewed the sediment and samples and determined that it's below human health standards for toxins or anything bad in there. We didn't know early on, hey, are there PCBs in there? I have a letter in my file that I'm happy to show you from the Environmental Protection Agency that says you really don't have a problem with what's in the sediments, which is good news. Concerns about what may happen to wells around the reservoirs. We'll be testing. That's really, I think, more of a Northern California issue, but we'll be testing and mitigating. If we have to drill deeper wells to mitigate impacts, we'll do that. If there are flooding impacts, and there will be like a 6 to 18 inch downriver flood impact in a 100-year event, we'll be flood-proofing homes or moving homes or doing whatever we have to do to take care of people. Not only are we going to do everything we can to do the right thing, but we will be required by FERC to do the right thing, to mitigate. A very fair question that arises a lot is who is going to fix problems after KRRC no longer exists? Because again, we are not going to stick around for a long time. We're going to do this project, and I'm guessing hang around for 8 to 10 years, something like that, and then go away because the project will be done. But if an impact shows up afterward, we need to have a bulletproof plan in place. And I would encourage you to take a look at the FERC order that came out last week. When they granted our request to reduce or have a new license, a smaller license for the 4 projects, it's a 38-page order, and they put us on notice. We are going to scrutinize you very carefully. We're looking out for the public interest, and we want an absolutely bulletproof liability and mitigation plan in place. So they're going to hold us accountable. They're not just giving us a pass on this, and so we are going to be held accountable. And if they have to accept our plan, or we don't move forward. That's pretty much it. And again, I've got some technical folks here. I've got Seth, who's awesome, who's been through multiple dam removals and can speak to that if you've got any technical questions. But with that, be happy to entertain any questions that you have. Not everybody wants. Yes, sir.
And we have microphones as well. So
oh yeah, we can do a roving mic.
I can do it since you might be answering stuff. So just raise your hand if you've got a question. I'll give you the mic. 3-minute limit per question or comment. Thank you.
Yes, you're planning on removing the 4 dams and improving water quality. The water you'll be getting downstream is from the Keno impoundment, I call it, the Link River, and it's some of the poorest water quality in the state of Oregon. There was a study out from PP&L when they were trying to relicense the dams that said it would take another 100 miles of river to clean up the water as good as it's being produced by the 4 dams in place with the sediment entrapment. So how can you justify now that the science has changed from when PP&L was trying to relicense the dams to now it's going to be better water quality without the dams, when the water you're going to be getting is going to be hot and it's going to be nasty coming out of Lake River?
You're right that in the sense that water quality up here has never looked like Lake Tahoe. It's an upside down system, as you're well aware, and we do have water quality issues and problems up here. But the science community, the science behind this has been extensively reviewed, including by the National Academy of Sciences, and they have determined that it's a big incremental step forward. It's not a complete answer to water quality, but there are substantial improvements, including temperature for fish, considerably colder water, especially when the spawners are in the river. I know there have been dueling science back and forth, and I'm not a science person, but you remember when the National Academy of Sciences way back in 2002, kind of spanked the federal government and said, hey, I remember that very vividly. You didn't really have sufficient information to make a decision to turn off water. I remember that. It was very controversial. And the Academy, they didn't say you've got junk science, which is kind of a common refrain that I hear. But they did say, we don't know if you made the right decision because you have insufficient evidence. So the National Academy kind of spanked the federal government and put them on notice. You need to do a way better job on your science. And they took it to heart. And an enormous amount of work and study has been done to the point where the National Academy of Sciences has looked at this plan and said it's going to do the things you say. It's going to improve water quality, it's going to improve temperature, it's going to deal with algae, and it's going to deal with fish disease. Does a lot more need to be done? Absolutely. And if you will remember the original, this agreement was originally joined at the hip with the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement, which anticipated a huge investment for water quality. That component did not pass muster with Congress. Neither of them passed muster with Congress. So that did not get enacted. But the Trump administration has a gentleman out here now from DOI, Alan Nicholson, who's talking about, what do we do to address some of those unaddressed issues, including water quality. But you're right, it's not going to do for water quality everything that we would like to see, but this is a big incremental step in the right direction. That's what the scientists say. And Jennifer back there?
So 72% of the people in Klamath County voted not to support dam removal, 82% voted in Siskiyou County not to support dam removal. You're moving ahead. The other thing you say, it's not going to impact agriculture. One of the biggest problems we have agriculturally is water storage and enough water. You will be removing 130,000 acre feet of water storage that has been used for pulse flows in recent history. How is that a good thing for agriculture to remove storage when that is the thing that we're lacking the most?
I'm going to defer your second question to Seth because he's got more expertise in this, but I want to hit on the issue of the local referendum. A local non-binding referendum does express community sentiment, but legally it's not binding. And for example, the California legislature said, we're going to devote $250 million to this. That absolutely trumps a local non-binding measure from Siskiyou County. Pardon me?
That's great.
It just does. So it's an expression of local concern, but again, it's not binding. And again, this is PacificCorp's private property, and that is not subject to someone voting about what they can and can't do with their private property. So it's a decision that they made to move forward. The Oregon PUC has said this is completely in the best interest of the ratepayers. I mean, it's in writing. I can show it to you. But and then Seth, I'm going to let you handle phase 2 of the question about operations for pulse flows.
Yeah, we talked last time a little bit about this, and I did go back and I've spoken with PacificCorp and with Bureau of Reclamation, who operates the upstream stuff. I wasn't able to find any instances where releases are made specifically for agriculture. You're right that releases are made, and that's associated with the biological opinion that Dave referenced earlier for fish disease. And so that 50 acre feet of that storage needs to be set aside and is called upon to flush the water for fish disease. But I could find no evidence of specific agricultural releases. So other than that BIOP where PacificCorp is required to release flows for fish, they reserve all the rest of that storage for hydropower production.
If they hadn't released the water from those dams, we would have released it from up here. 20,000 acre feet would have put 7,000 acres out of production up here.
But the good news about the project is when that disease goes away, which it will go away when the reservoirs are gone, yes, the specific disease we're talking about for fish will go away because it does not. It has not been there before the dams. And so that will go away, and like Dave said, we are not in control of what happens with that biological opinion because it's not part of our project. But there would be there would be evidence and data at some point for reclamation to renegotiate that biological opinion with the agencies. But potentially then they wouldn't need that 50 acre feet, and then you wouldn't have to deal with losing any flows for that size. And so that should help ag in the long term.
I don't think I need a mic. I think you can hear me.
Okay, so
I have serious concerns because of everything that's going to happen here. And the big concern I have is, first and foremost, we treat our sewage, and when it's treated, it goes into the river, and in the lake, Upper Klamath Lake. And now the EPA is on us because they're saying our treated water isn't acceptable to go into the lake and downriver, when in fact the river is more polluted than what the treated water is going into it. The real issue I have is once these dams are gone, once these reservoirs are gone, there's no flood control, there's no water storage, and for some crazy reason, if we had 3 or 4 years of heavy moisture, what's going to hold us back? Upper Klamath Lake is polluted now, and we have a multi-million-dollar industry, ag industry, harvesting out of that lake. And if, for some reason they start releasing this down to what you call a clean river now, that stuff's still going to be flowing down. And as it is now, they're holding water back in the lake. What's going to feed that river?
Well, again, the 4 dams in question are not operated for flood control. They're operated in a really tight margin, I think 4 or 6 feet, margin to just spin turbines. They don't store water for flood control purposes. It's just pass-through water. Regarding whatever might be happening with EPA and releases up here, I'm not really sure if that has anything per se to do with our project. Is that anything we're dealing with? It's the kind of the big bottom line again from the scientific community is water quality is going to improve significantly. Disease processes that are requiring those flushing flows, we can eliminate the biological necessity for the flushing flows because we're going to get rid of the disease. It won't be hanging around in the same way it's hanging around now. You're going to get scour going through there, you're having moving water. It's just going to be a different system. So I don't know if I can address your other questions about what EPA is or is not requiring, but our project doesn't really, I think, directly bear on that. Other questions?
I guess I just want to address maybe the crowd and a lot of things I've heard over the years. I live in Fort Klamath now, where my great-grandparents and grandparents lived. Previously, I spent 7 years on the lower Klamath River on Somes Bar, and many months in the summer, the river was unsafe to even touch. I had rafting trips planned with my niece and nephew, and I had to tell them they can't come. People's dogs die, and it's incredibly unhealthy. You literally can't recreate in the river. It looks like antifreeze. And the question about water quality, whether it's better above or below the dams, it depends on what you're talking about. If it's sediment, it's one thing. If it's toxic algae, the stuff that actually can kill people, it's worse coming out of the dams than going in. And if you don't believe it, you can go there next summer in August and look at what's coming in and what's going out. So studies prove that. I mean, you can test toxic algae concentrations. It will be better after the dams come out. But we have a huge mess to fix up here. I mean, I live in Fort Klamath. There is a big mess, and we need a lot of money to restore. But as far as toxic algae and public safety, it will be better with the dams out.
Any other questions? And if not, we can visit afterward. Individually, happy to do so. I'd just like to say one thing about my observation. What's happened up here? We've been lurching from crisis to crisis for too long up here in Southern Oregon, Northern California. People on both both sides of the issue have gotten hurt. Ag's gotten hurt, the fisheries gotten hurt, tribal communities have gotten hurt, commercial fishermen, sport fishermen. There really is a way to do something different, and there is a way to make this into a win-win. And I very much understand the concern, how it sticks in the craw of some folks. It's like, why can't we just have it the way it used to be? And you know, the dams still produce electricity. They work fine the way they are. I've heard that for a long time. But you can't ignore the law, and you can't ignore, you know, that duly elected officials, members of Congress have enacted the Clean Water Act, have enacted protections for fish, endangered species. Those are real and have to be complied with. And there's California, when California holds PacificCorp accountable for the Clean Water Act, they have to comply with that. And they come to the conclusion that the cost of essentially bringing those dams up to current standards is just not tenable. And again, we're looking at crashing fish numbers. And there used to be a robust fishery and robust fish runs on the Klamath. What we're doing right now isn't working. So doing something, people say, would you have a guarantee? There's no such thing as a guarantee, but the best scientific evidence available says it's going to work. And we're also going to spend a boatload of money up here. So let's talk about jobs just a little bit before you take off. I mean, you've got a budget of up to $450 million to be spent in this area on a really big project, and we're going to be hiring a lot of people, a lot of local people. We have a jobs information and a jobs board here. Take a look at what we're going to be needing, and think about the implications for hotels and restaurants and all kinds of services when a big workforce is here working on a really big project. I think this could really be a win-win for the area. So again, thank you. Questions, sir?
Yeah, along those lines, is there going to be any restoration above the Keno Dam, or is everything below?
Questions regarding restoration, where's it going to be? We have a very narrow mission, which is to operate within the footprint of our project. So we will operate in the footprint of, you know, between JC Boyle and Irongate, and do restoration in that footprint. We acknowledge and can see that a lot more needs to be done. And again, at one time, there was a bill in Congress, or probably will be another one, that does a lot more. There is so much potential to improve water quality in Oregon that California, believe it or not, California spends California dollars in Oregon doing restoration activities because they get more bang for the buck up here than they do in California. I found out that from a guy from the water board. Like, how did you get permission to do that? So it was hard, but we could make the case that instead of this much, we're going to get this much for the same dollar. Restoring fringe wetlands around Upper Klamath Lake, huge potential there. So we're optimistic that this will kind of be phase one, and that someone else will pick up the ball and do phase two, and do the kind of restoration work you're talking about. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, you were going to have somebody speak into what the post-dam abatement or removal would look like, the after effect when your job is completed, and in your mitigation plan after the dam has been removed, or whatever your protocol entails. Is there a report? I mean, is that self-generated, or was it a third-party generation that you guys had to approve and submit? Is it finished, or has it been approved?
I turn that over to Seth.
Yeah, and if so, could we get a copy of it? Because, you know, I think there's a lot of concern about what it's going to look like when it's over. I get you've done some.
Right.
I haven't, so.
So, yeah, so we do have a technical report that was submitted to the State Water Resource Control Board in California and Oregon, actually, ODEC, to support their 401 water quality certifications, and that is available publicly.
Okay.
And so we can get you the link to that.
Yeah.
You can
When we're
download.
done, I need to.
Yeah.
It's also on our website, all of the regulatory materials that we've posted or that regulatory agencies have posted about our project are all on our website. So it's just klamathrenewal.org/regulatory.
And there's,
Have they been approved? Or are they in the process of being of approval?
the process of approval. So
Okay.
for CEQA, for for that process, they're using that technical information to do impact assessments, and then
Exactly.
they'll develop their mitigation measures off of that, and then they'll have a public draft that's coming out later this spring.
Okay, cool.
And then in Oregon, they're also drafting it, they're gonna have a draft water quality certification that's gonna come out later this spring, and, or maybe early summer, and that'll also be available for review, and there'll be meetings associated with that as well.
Thank you.
We have a new report, so a slightly more detailed version of that same report that's going into FERC, who is the federal lead, and that's going in July of this year. But it's basically the same report with a little more detail on certain things. But restoration of reservoirs it has its own section and appendice in the report that you'll download. It's about 400 pages in the main body, about 1,000 with all the backups. So that is available.
It's been studied extensively. So if there are no more questions, we will wrap them. Thank you very much for coming out. Appreciate it. We'll stick around and take questions.